Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining me on the channel today. I'm Ted Yacucci. We're going to explore a really interesting topic today, in my opinion. We're going to explore the note that was supposedly dropped off to FBI headquarters in Dallas by who? Lee Oswald, just a week or 2 weeks before the JFK assassination. And we're going to look very, very stringently at why Gordon Shanklin, the special agent in charge of the FBI, ordered that note be destroyed within 2 hours of Oswald's murder, thereby destroying evidence. We'll look at the people who claim there was differing messages in the note, and we'll look at whether it was really Lee Oswald that actually dropped that note off to the FBI office. We have a lot to discover, a lot to explore, so let's dive right in. That shot by Jack Ruby that killed Lee Oswald was on Sunday morning, November 24th, less than 48 hours after the assassination of President John F. Kennedy nearby in Dealey Plaza. Not much was known about Oswald at the time, except what had been put out about him by the Dallas police. So a note supposedly dropped off by Lee Oswald to James Hosty, an FBI agent in Dallas, just a week or so before the assassination, had to be considered of prime evidentiary importance. Well, the first thing that we have to consider about this note, supposedly dropped off at FBI headquarters by Lee Oswald, is that its very existence was denied for 12 years by the FBI. That's right. Even through an internal FBI investigation, this note supposedly never showed up. But then, when the House Select Committee on Assassinations met in 1975, 12 years after the assassination and the murder of Lee Oswald, internal interviews in the Dallas office turned up the story of the note, the supposed Oswald note. So let's start at the beginning now and follow it and see if we can make some determinations about it. Our story starts with a receptionist who was interviewed by the House Select Committee on Assassinations, and her name was Mrs. Nancy Lee Fenner. Here's her testimony. She says that a man who would later be identified as Lee Oswald got off the elevator in the on the floor that the Dallas FBI headquarters was located. She says from her desk she could see him clearly. He said, "H.A. Hosty, please." And he had a wild look in his eye, and he was awfully fidgety, and he had a 3x5 envelope in his hand. It was not sealed, and in it was a piece of paper approximately this size, and it was folded. And the bottom portion of the letter was visible the whole time he was standing there, waiting to see if H.A. Hosty was there. And she also states, as the bottom portion of the letter was visible, I could not help but read the last 2 lines. The last 2 lines stated, I will either blow up the Dallas Police Department or the FBI office. Okay, so let's consider for a moment Mrs. Fenner. And I can tell you that in my opinion, there is about a 99.99999% chance that Mrs. Fenner is lying. The reason I say that is that she will make some statements about that letter. First of all, that she could ever see what was really on it, but her statement about Lee Oswald threatening to blow up the FBI headquarters or anything else simply was not repeated by Special Agent James Hosty or anyone else when Hosty testified before the House Select Committee on Assassinations. He says that it was a note provided by Oswald that just said that it was a nuisance note. He was upset that Agent Hosty was coming to Mrs. Payne's house and interviewing Marina Oswald. Well, first of all, let's think about for a second the importance of what Mrs. Fenner said. Remember that she said, he came to my desk and he said, H.A. Hosty, please, with the letter in his hands. Well, would somebody that was really, really agitated, number one, getting off the elevator and coming up to a receptionist, would they say, please, right? Maybe, maybe not, but it doesn't seem very likely. All right, then she says that he's got this envelope in his hands with a tri-folded letter inside. Okay, a tri-folded letter. Hosty will say the same thing, a tri-folded letter. Right, so then she says he gets fidgety and he starts taking the letter in and out of the envelope. How the heck is she going to be able to read the last two lines of whatever is on that letter if it is tri-folded? It's impossible. But the really, really important thing here, in my opinion, is something that I just happened to catch when I was going through the research again for this video. And think about what Mrs. Fenner said. She said that when Oswald walked up, he had a wild look in his eye. Well, where did we hear that? Remember about a month ago, I did a video on why Lee Oswald could not be allowed to live. And I said that during the time that the assassination took place, up until the time that Lee Oswald was killed in the basement of the Dallas City jail, there were so many panicked people because they didn't know what was going to happen with Lee Oswald. They didn't know if Jack Ruby would be successful in murdering him. So what were they doing with Henry Wade, the district attorney, and everybody else that were putting out stories? Well, remember I showed you the LA Times story that claimed that Lee Oswald got on a bus, announced that the president had been shot, and laughed wildly. And again, I think that this ties in. That was the story that happened with the panic, and I think that's what Mrs. Fenner was then coached to say. Okay, because again, this has all got to revolve back on Lee Oswald, that he's a lone, really a nut, that he's crazed, okay? This story that came out in the LA Times that was provided by the Dallas Times named an unnamed source as its quote. And so it would have had to be the FBI, because you wouldn't take an unnamed source with a story like that and not print it unless it came from a government agency like the FBI. Okay, so Mrs. Fenner's story right away we see is questionable at best. So what happens to the note from here? Well, Mrs. Fenner gives it to another agent. The other agent looks at it, doesn't seem too concerned, and leaves it for Agent Hosty. When Agent Hosty gets back in the office, he says in front of the House Select Committee on Assassinations, well, it was an envelope, a business type envelope, a blank envelope. It was on plain bond paper. I do not recall a signature on it. I believe it was handwritten, quite short, no more than 2 paragraphs in length. The first part stated that I had been interviewing his wife without permission and I should not do this. The second part at the end said if I did not stop talking to his wife, he would take action against the FBI. Mr. Agent Hosty then said that he didn't consider it a threat at all, considered it just kind of a nuisance letter, and he got a lot of those types of letter, so he filed it away at that point. Okay, so what are the important things that we just saw with Agent James Hosty's testimony before the House Select Committee on Assassinations? Well, the first thing that we have to say about it is that if there was a note from Lee Oswald, why are we just hearing about it in 1975? Why didn't Agent James Hosty, when he testified before the Warren Commission, bring up the fact that there was a letter from Lee Oswald that came into the FBI office 1 to 2 weeks before the assassination? The fact that James Hosty, Agent Hosty, did not mention that letter to the Warren Commission shows that he was under orders, and he did say that before the House Select Committee. I'll show you that a little later. He was under orders from J. Edgar Hoover, from Assistant Director Alan Belmont, and from Special Agent in Charge Gordon Shanklin, not to say anything extra at all that the Warren Commission members didn't ask, and not to bring up anything on his own. Unbelievable. The other thing that, of course, we have to look at is that he says that, it was just a kind of a routine note, and there was nothing that was very inflammatory about it. Unlike what Mrs. Fenner had said, where she says that Lee Oswald or whoever wrote the note was threatening to blow up FBI headquarters or other locations. Both the agent that saw it first and left it for Agent Hosty and Agent Hosty himself will say that it was just a note requesting that Lee Oswald's wife Marina was left alone. All right, so this is really getting interesting now, right? So let's take it to the point of right after Lee Oswald is shot in the basement of the Dallas City Jail on Sunday morning, November 24th.
He reached down and took out the memorandum and the note in question, and he handed it to me, and he said, in effect, Oswald's dead now, there can be no trial. Here, get rid of this. I then proceeded to tear it up. In his presence, he said, no, get it out of here. I don't even want it in this office. Get rid of it. I then took it out and destroyed it.
And how did you destroy it?
I took it into the washroom and flushed it down the drain.
Did you testify before the Warren Commission?
I did.
Did you volunteer or give any information about the note or its destruction?
I did not.
Why not?
I wasn't asked.
Did you give any information or volunteer any information with respect to your instructions regarding Commission Exhibit 103?
No, sir.
Why not?
I wasn't asked.
And did you think about volunteering the information?
No, sir.
Why not?
I was instructed when I went up there that I was to only answer the questions that were set to me, and I was not to expand on anything and not to elaborate, to only answer the questions that were put to me.
And who gave you those instructions?
Given to me by at least two officials in Dallas and at least one in FBI headquarters. They were given to me by Mr. Shanklin, Mr. Gimberling, who was a supervisor who succeeded Mr. Howe, and also by former Assistant Director Alan Belmont.
Okay, now the next really important aspect that we have to consider about this letter is that Gordon Shanklin, Special Agent in Charge Gordon Shanklin, the man that instructed Agent Hosty to tear up and then throw the letter in the toilet, that man, Gordon Shanklin, says that that never happened, that the letter never existed, that he doesn't remember that letter at all. Can you believe that? That's what Gordon Shanklin claimed up until the time that he passed away. It's what he testified to before the House Select Committee on Assassinations. Well, it's an obvious lie. So why did he have to stick to the lie? Well, think about it. If he didn't stick to the lie, then what is he admitting? He's admitting that as the top FBI agent in Dallas, the city where the President of the United States just got shot, that he ordered evidence destroyed about the person who is being considered the lone shooter of that president and who was killed himself by Jack Ruby just 2 hours before. So Gordon Shanklin had to maintain the lie. And I don't know how anybody could have kept a straight face, because how could you forget that you had received a letter in your office that came from the proposed murderer of the President of the United States, and then order it destroyed and then not remember it? It's impossible. So, was it Lee Oswald that delivered the note in question to FBI headquarters in Dallas just a week or two before the JFK assassination? My answer is absolutely not. We know that imposters were popping up around Dallas, especially in the 2 weeks before the assassination took place. In my opinion, it was almost certainly an imposter that dropped off that letter to FBI headquarters in case that letter would be needed. Remember that Hosty said the letter wasn't even signed. They would have the ability to change any of the letter and then put Oswald's signature on it if they needed to at a later date. Remember also that I contend that it was almost a certainty that it was Lee Oswald who saved President Kennedy's life in Chicago on November 2nd, 1963, just 3 weeks before the Dallas assassination. I think that Lee Oswald had ample ability to make contact with the FBI, the Secret Service, or any other agency that he needed to make contact with. That's why I also don't believe the assertion that Oliver Stone made, where maybe he suggested, well, what about the possibility that that note contained a warning about President Kennedy's assassination? I don't believe that Lee Oswald would have contacted intelligence in that way. He would have done it the way that he would have done it surreptitiously. He would have done it in private, and he would have made sure that that message got through the same way that he had again in Chicago 3 weeks earlier. This is a really interesting story. Thank you so much for continuing to visit the channel. And please, if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. I really appreciate it. We'll see you next time.